I was wondering if you can talk about the American classical style. Because to me, I think of Samuel Barber and I instantly think of like Eric Korngold Violin Concerto D major. That has this in the beginning has this really wonderful open, as if you're this openness, as you say. And for me, I imagine like the sun rising up on a plain in the Korngold Violin Concerto, and I feel that is very similar to the Barber. And I'm wondering if you can comment on some specific elements you notice in American music that you've noticed in your career by working with these composers.
Well, I mean, I think the first batch of Americans that I championed. By the way, I'm glad to hear you speak about the Korngold. I love that piece. I never learned it, and but I teach it, so at least I have
Right.
that connection with it. I love that piece. Um, of those Hollywood composers, I went with Roja, um, and didn't go with Korngold or Waxman. I went with the Roja Violin Concerto. So I think there was more of a sense of openness and hope with the early batch of composers that I was working with. It was just that style that I loved. I mean, the William Schumann Concerto, which is unjustly neglected, is big boned, confident, um, and brash, hard as hell. But the slow movement is yearning and gorgeous and always curious and searching, and um, yeah, that certainly spoke to me, not only as an interpreter, but as a fellow American. Um, it's just the barber that got to me. I mean, how um, the reason that piece got to me so much is because it's so obvious he didn't really know how to write for the violin. I mean, these passages are so gnarly and um, awkward in the first movement, and of course the third movement he wrote because uh, the the kid who first played it decided the piece was too easy, and so he wrote a ridiculously hard third
Barber was like,
movement.
okay, challenge accepted. I
But it's
can
those,
make this harder for you.
and he did. And the kid couldn't play it, but he brought in Oscar Shumsky to prove that it could be played. I think Shumsky basically sight read it. Um, that makes me pretty envious. But I was not able to sight read that thing. But it's the uh, it's the warts and all of the first movement that gets to me with the Barber concerto. It's a little heavily orchestrated, but he's basically just vulnerable, and that really struck me. And he did tell me, he said, if you can't sing my music, it's not worth playing. Um, but with the composers, later on, composers like Paul Moravec, there's so many. I don't want to leave anybody out that I've worked with. But I guess Philip Glass started speaking to me as well. Like a lot of Juilliard students back in the day, we loved making fun of Philip Glass's music, and just didn't take it seriously, and that was a big mistake on our part, because when the idea came up to record his first concerto, I remember sitting on the floor with my wife, having a glass of wine, listening to Gidon Kramer's recording with the Vienna Philharmonic, and I went, "Holy, this piece is amazing! This is It's so manipulative, but in the but in the greatest sense of the word, and it just totally seduced me, and I just couldn't wait to learn it, and that's when I met Philip, uh, and I went and played it for him, and he liked it, and the only thing he said, it was right before the recording with the Houston Symphony and Eschenbach, and he said, "Listen, you sound fine, it'll be great. Just tell the triangle player in the third movement that he'd better be in rhythm. I cannot listen to the Vienna Philharmonic recording because the triangle player is
Oh
off."
no.
gets derailed in the third movement. So that's the only thing he told me about his first concerto. Um, and then I started playing that a lot, and that's when I realized I wanted him to write the American Four Seasons, and that was a much closer collaboration because he was amazing. He would send me snippets and the MIDI recordings of the pieces, and then he gave me a gift. He gave me four solo introductions to each season that could also be strung together as an 11-minute piece for solo violin. So each season has an introduction. So it was so kind of him to do that. Uh, so that I yeah, he knows about all those knock knock jokes too, and I think he has all the Philip Glass jokes on his website.
That's
He's
awesome.
in on the joke.
A specific word you mentioned is the vulnerability when you were talking about the Barber violin concerto. I feel like that word vulnerability has something to do with that American spirit, American dream, the vulnerability of trying to pursue a dream or someone who immigrated to this country. I mean, I can relate because my parents immigrated from Europe and I'm second generation. So there's this vulnerability of like, okay, I'm going into open waters. I have no idea what to do, but I'm going to give it my best. And that's why I kind of mentioned the Korngold Violin Concerto, because you have this open space in the first movement that is just optimistic. You have this optimism, and then the second movement, you are just completely in love with this idea of the American dream. But then now you got to hustle with the third movement. It's so difficult, and then you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that third movement of the Korngold just lifts my spirit up. There's like, okay, I just want to go out and do something. I want to go work, right? And that's something that I've also kind of contributed to that concerto because I love the Korngold as well. And the Barber, I don't know if it has that same effect in terms of the third movement with the optimistic. I think everyone in the audience and the orchestra feels very stressed. I know I'm as an orchestra member, I was playing in the orchestra when a colleague of mine was playing that as solo, but